Around 1920, 1930, 1940, about 20-year span, right? Give or take. When the atomic bombs were being created, there is a universal law that was created that if the Earth plane would be physically destroyed, the higher dimensional light beings in the Galactic Federation of Light can come in and assist. That is one of the only ways that the Galactic Federation of Light can ever override free will, is if the actual physical Earth would be destroyed. And once these beings started to create nuclear warfare and bombs that would literally destroy the entire Earth experiment, the Galactic Federation of Light came in. And when they did, they started to energetically pull the fourth dimensional consciousnesses and races off the Earth plane. And this took, in human years, about 90 years. For them, it was instantaneous almost. It was a now moment. For the human, it took about 90 years. So right now, in our now moment, there aren't any fourth dimensional races like the Anunnaki or the Greys that were doing the experiments. There's very few, if any, on the physical Earth plane, inside the physical Earth plane, continuing to do these experiments. If a human is experiencing this, they are having the experience off the Earth plane. I want to preface this. I'm not saying that humans aren't being experimented on. Very few are still. Very few. Very, very rare. If somebody is experiencing that, they're experiencing it outside of the Earth plane. These beings are no longer able to come in. It wasn't challenging for the Galactic Federation of Light to take these fourth dimensional races off. They energetically could pull them off quite easily. The reptilians were a whole nother story. Why? Because the reptilian consciousness was inside the physical body. And so what the Galactic Federation of Light noticed was that as they were trying to pull the energy, the consciousness, it's light, okay? It's not a body, it's not a physical form like you see, okay? It's consciousness. It's a fourth dimensional consciousness, reptilian consciousness. As they were trying to pull it out of the body, what would also happen is the spirit or soul that was in that body living as that human would also come out. And so they were noticing that the actual human would die. And so they had to be very careful how they pulled the reptilians off the Earth plane. They had to be very, very careful how they did it. And the reptilians knew this. So they knew that they had an advantage, so to speak. And so what happened after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is that eventually 90%, give or take, have been pulled off the Earth plane. There is 10% of the reptilian consciousness left on the Earth plane. So I asked them about numbers, right? Because we like numbers. So they said about 10 to 20,000 reptilians are left. Now remember, they cannot multiply. They've never been able to multiply because they're stuck inside the grid. So what we are recognizing and understanding in this now moment is that because the Galactic Federation of Light is their hands are sort of tied, they can't get the rest of these reptilians out without killing the human or the higher consciousness in it. It is up to us, the light workers, the way showers, the star seeds, to alchemize, clear, and dismantle this consciousness. And this consciousness we call the reptilian consciousness. And this consciousness, this reptilian consciousness, is inside human bodies. And this consciousness is the small minority, the small number of humans that have been controlling the systems that have been in place, that have been controlling and manipulating us for a very long time. by creating a massive amount of fear and by creating programs that are so advanced. The mind control that these consciousnesses have created in order to control us would blow your mind. What they have been able to design under the ground, under the physical earth, would blow your mind. What they have been able to do on an energetics level in order to control would blow your mind. But they have humans, they have human bodies, and so they have a human body doing it. And we have names for those humans, right? Maybe there's politicians, maybe some of them are movie stars, maybe some of them are elite, right? In places like the Rockefellers or the Rothschild, right? These sort of family names that are behind the curtain, right? We know about them, we've heard about them, but we don't see them very often. Most of the reptilian consciousnesses were not necessarily physically seen, but we are seeing 1000% the systems that they have put in place and used to control us. And that is what you are seeing right now. And that is what we are unraveling, dismantling, and alchemizing. So that, when you think about, I'm just double checking that I'm doing all of this. When you hear that there are dark energies or dark consciousness or reptilians, it is a consciousness that has been on the earth plane for thousands of years. Actually, millions of years they began. And it is our job to clear them. So let me back up for a moment. When I was speaking about 7,000 years ago, that the earth almost hit a 50% light quotient, right? It was holding 50% of its light, 50% of the light it needed to get to the 5D. In 1987, the harmonic convergence, Earth hit that 50%. So it began to jump onto the trajectory and the timeline of absolute ascension. But it was wiggly and wobbly. There was still a little bit of like, ooh, is it there? Is it not there? December of 2012 is when it solidified that timeline. It moved into the trajectory and timeline of absolute evolution of consciousness into that 5D field and beyond, no matter what happens on the earth plane. No matter what happens on the earth plane, no matter what is seen, heard, and experienced on the earth plane, Earth is holding enough light now where she has moved herself and the human collective onto a trajectory and timeline that it can't get off of, which is ascending into 5D consciousness. It's an absolute. And so what we are seeing right now is all of us starting to come online, the Great Awakening, to wake up and to say, holy cow, look at what has been in our reality that we haven't seen. The systems, the groups, the humans, the ways that we have been, it's starting to boil up and come to the surface to be seen. So that we, the awakened ones, that are shining light from our bodies, that are holding higher states of consciousness, can see it and alchemize it for the sole purpose of continuing to pull the human collective into higher states of consciousness and the 5D field. We are dismantling and we are alchemizing the reptilian consciousness. The humans that have that reptilian consciousness in it don't know necessarily that they have the reptilian consciousness in them. Meaning, if you're a higher consciousness and you dropped into the human body, you either chose to say, yes, I will be infiltrated by the reptilians for the sole purpose of allowing the human collective to shift. Because the reptilians are floating in the consciousness. They need to be in the human body in order to be alchemized. Otherwise, we can't see them. Otherwise, we can't feel them. We don't know they're there unless they're in the body. So we need human bodies for them to infiltrate so they can play out their role. And so there are many higher dimensional consciousness, light workers, way showers, and starseeds that agreed when coming down that they would be infiltrated by the reptilians. And there are many higher dimensional consciousnesses that are in the body that had no idea necessarily that the reptilians would infiltrate. So there's a combination, it's a little confusing, but there's a combination of humans that agreed to it, or higher dimensional light beings that agreed to it, and many higher dimensional light beings that were literally infiltrated. So when you look at these elite groups that are human, that have a personality and an ego and a name, many of them are holding reptilian consciousness inside them. And beyond that reptilian consciousness, there is a higher dimensional soul or spirit inside them as well. The reptilian cannot incarnate into a human body because one of the universal laws, remember, in the 5D human body, the only way you could incarnate is if you were in a sixth dimensional consciousness, right? Why? Because sixth dimensional field is where the body was going. When the earth became a 3D field and had the 5D grid around it, the 3D human body was designed to move into a 5D field. So fourth dimensional races and beings couldn't even access and move into the body. Why? Because there's a 5D field around it. But if you're in a fifth dimensional field or higher, you could infiltrate in or incarnate into the body as a higher dimensional consciousness and experience the human body. So fifth dimensional consciousness and higher is what incarnates into the human body. You understand? There is and was a fifth dimensional grid around the earth plane when she began again in 3D. The human body is in 3D. The human body is moving to 5D. 4D is just a bridge. It's not a stopping zone where we hang out and play. We just move through it. And so because of that 5D grid, any consciousness that wants to incarnate and be in the human body has to be at a 5D consciousness or higher. And so the 4D consciousnesses, the reptilians, need human bodies to experience this 3D consciousness. And the only way we can clear out the 4D reptilians is by having them in the bodies. And so there are many higher dimensional consciousnesses that incarnate for the sole purpose of being infiltrated by the reptilians in order for them to be alchemized into light. And there are many way showers, light workers, and starseeds, or any other name you want to call it. It's really not important, the names. We get so attached to names. Well, what about this? Am I this? What about this name, right? We get really concerned and attached to names, and they want you to not worry about labels and names. It's consciousness and energy. But there are many higher dimensional beings that dropped in and that are literally on the front lines of dismantling the reptilian consciousness. Many. And there are many of us that are only going to be watching it. There are only going to be seeing it. Okay? So how are we alchemizing that reptilian consciousness? The same way we alchemize anything. As it comes up to be seen, we see it. Oh my God, there's fear. There's control. There's manipulation. There's greed. Right? There's all these, the systems try to keep you down. They try to dim you. And so we see it, we acknowledge it, and then we hold ourselves in higher states of consciousness as often as we can. We feel it as well. We feel the fear, we feel the anger, we feel the rage, we feel all of that. And when our light shines on it, it alchemizes it. It's the natural process of alchemization. So the 5G towers, the chemtrails, the vaccines, COVID, sex trafficking, Black Lives Matter, animal abuse, child abuse, human abuse, you name it, right? You name all of the systems. I don't care what it is. Keep naming them. Any system that is shrouded in fear, control, manipulation, greed, terror, abuse. Those are the systems that we're collapsing. And it is a small group of humans holding reptilian consciousness that is controlling the large systems that are in place. Now, I want to preface something. There is evil. So there are higher dimensional consciousnesses incarnated into human form and playing out a life that looks evil. Okay? Many humans that you could look back in history and even right now that do very evil things. They abuse people, they abuse animals, they cheat, they lie, they steal, they do horrible things. They're not reptilians necessarily, okay? So just because somebody plays out a very evil life doesn't mean they're reptilian. There is a small number of the reptilians. Small number. And they are typically behind the scenes. They usually they're not necessarily in the limelight. Now, there are reptilians in the limelight. Reptilian meaning humans that are holding the reptilian consciousness. There are reptilians that are holding that are in the limelight that you know and that you see. But the majority of them are very quiet, right? You see them every once in a while. So these humans that are in our every now, that are very evil and doing kind of evil things, that are just kind of everyday humans, they're not reptilian consciousnesses. They're just playing in the evil. So this isn't about, my guides want to get this very clear, you guys. This isn't about how do I know if somebody's a reptilian or not. That it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you know them to be reptilian or not. What is important is that you recognize the systems that you're collapsing. It's not individual reptilian consciousnesses. It is the system and as a whole that you want to focus on. And the humans that are in that system, they will alchemize. So for instance, sex trafficking, right? Massively large system. What humans are in that system doing those things, controlling those things, creating those things? A small handful are the puppeteers, are the reptilians. Thousands of them are being controlled by the reptilians. So they don't have reptilian energy in them, but they are controlled by the reptilians. You understand? It's a small number that's controlling the sex trafficking or pedophile ring that's around the entire world. But there are hundreds of thousands of humans that are doing it. And they're being manipulated by this small group of reptilian humans. It's like an energetic needle that's going into these humans in order to control them. And then they suck out that fear, they suck out that control, they suck everything out by manipulating and controlling the humans. So a human that they're controlling, doing all these horrible things, they're able to suck that energy out of them. Does that make sense? And so what happens is you have humans that are doing these horrific things, being controlled by a small group of reptilian consciousnesses. And a lot of them don't even realize that they're being controlled and manipulated. They don't realize that there's a mind control happening. It's that potent. It's that powerful. So some characteristics of a reptilian consciousness, though, just so you can start to kind of tap into it. They're very charismatic. They're very charming. They have a very big presence to them. So when you come in contact with, and it's rare that you may actually come in physical contact with one, but if you do, they take up a room. You don't necessarily see them as being evil or mean or dark. They're not saying evil, mean, and dark things. They're very deceptive. They're very deceiving. Very deceiving. They're very intelligent. And they have a different look about them in their eyes. So if you look a reptilian consciousness in the eyes, you will see and feel the reptilian consciousness. You'll feel it. and it's almost bone chilling. And when you are in the vicinity of and connecting and communicating with a reptilian consciousness, you almost can't look them in the eyes. And when you do, it feels very strange. It feels like not right, like something isn't good, right? And yet here is this person that's standing there that looks completely normal, that's happy and jovial and laughing and making jokes, right? A reptilian consciousness isn't evil looking until you feel into the energy. And then it's quite shocking. There's something that just feels off about them. So again, this isn't about necessarily trying to pinpoint and say, oh my God, they're reptilian. Oh my God, they're reptilian, right? Because there are a lot of humans that are controlled by the reptilian energies. And so they have that energy sort of around them, right? But they're not necessarily holding the reptilian consciousness. So the reptilian consciousness, the human, is controlling with mind control that other human. And so there's an energetic cord sort of connecting one human, reptilian, to this human. And so they've got that sort of weird energy to them, but they're not necessarily holding the reptilian consciousness. And a lot of times, a human that is holding the reptilian consciousness, you can almost see them as a reptilian consciousness. It's very strange. And the more that we start to alchemize these systems and these beings, right, the louder they're going to get. And that's what's happening right now. As we start shining light on them and saying no more lies, no more manipulation, no more fear tactics, no more mind control, none of that, right? We start standing up and seeing, we start to awaken into what has been happening, what they have been trying to do and have done for hundreds and thousands of years. They freak out because what they are used to experiencing and having, that fear consciousness, that control consciousness, that manipulation consciousness, it's not, they aren't getting it anymore. Literally, energetically, as more humans wake up, they are falling out of fear. They're moving out of fear. They're not playing in fear consciousness. They're not emanating fear consciousness. And if you don't emanate fear consciousness, the reptilians don't have anything to feed off of. Then they get really loud. They get angry. They start doing these tactics that are nuts. They start doing things that are so bizarre that you're like, did you honestly just do that? Did you honestly just say that? Censorship is a huge piece of mind control and manipulation. Who's censoring? Why are they censoring? And what are they censoring? Right? So if we start to take away and we start to move into this bigger perspective, we start to realize that it's not about the human. It's about the consciousness inside the human. That is what we're clearing. And it is going to get louder. The systems are going to get louder. That consciousness is going to get louder because it is being literally melted like the Wicked Witch of the West. I'm melting, right? And it gets louder and louder as it melts. That's what's happening. So here is the last message. This is not about fear, like, oh my God, there's reptilians out there. It's a consciousness, first of all, so just let it be a consciousness. It's not these dark-looking reptilian lizard-like beings that are running around the earth plane. It's a consciousness that is inside a human form, that is controlling and manipulating that human, and that has been for thousands of years, and we are now courageously, as warriors of light, shining the light on those systems, shining the light on those reptilian consciousnesses, and literally melting and dissolving and alchemizing it. Just isn't fun. Doesn't feel good. Second, we are absolutely, unequivocally, without a freaking doubt, on a timeline and a trajectory that is moving into higher states of consciousness and a fifth dimensional field. It's an absolute. And what that means is that no matter what we see unraveling in the external, we're still moving into higher states of consciousness. We cannot be pulled back down. They cannot win any longer. Their tactics and their control, their manipulation, their ability to manipulate energy, it doesn't work when more and more higher dimensional consciousnesses, which is you and I, wake up, step out of the third dimensional matrix and see everything for what it is. Our light is shining too bright now for them to manipulate and control us. That's the beautiful piece. And there will be a now moment in a future now where they will know, they being the reptilian consciousnesses, will no longer be on the earth plane. How? Because as we shine the light, hold higher states of consciousness, see, feel, speak up, and shout that this is no longer going to work, the energy and light that comes from our physical bodies literally moves that consciousness, dissolves that consciousness. It dissolves that human. It dissolves that system. And whether that means they get put in jail, whether that means they end up dying in some way, whether that means that they shift the way they're doing things and all of a sudden they move into doing something completely different and that consciousness dissolves out of the human. There's a lot of ways that that consciousness, the reptilian consciousness, can dissolve. But what is happening is that it is alchemizing into light. It is shifting out of where it is now. By us shining the light, by us holding higher states of consciousness in order to shine the light, for us to stand up and say no, for us to keep teaching, to keep speaking about it, to feel it. And for all of you that are not doing any of that, but are aware, you're holding higher states of consciousness, and that is doing a magnificent amount of work. For all of you that are like, I don't go there, I don't look at it, I don't want to know, perfect. Because you are doing so much work by holding the higher states of consciousness in your body, because that is emanating out a vibrational pulse of high frequency light that is hitting those systems and those humans that are holding that reptilian consciousness, and it's dissolving it. You don't need to know how this works. You don't need to see it physically happen because it's energy. But this is how we dissolve it. And slowly but surely, the consciousness, that dense fear, control, manipulation, greed consciousness starts to dissolve or melt or alchemize. It's a trajectory and timeline that is an absolute. It's not a matter of will it. It's a matter of it is. Let's go. How much longer? And it's going to take time. Human third dimensional time. It's going to take years. And that is why we are preparing right now to be able to do this again and again and again in every now moment with as much love, compassion, and empathy for the entire human collective, including the reptilian consciousnesses. Because the reptilian consciousnesses are just being them. They are playing in a third dimensional field, inside a third dimensional body, experiencing really dense third dimensional consciousness. And to us, it looks horrific. So again, they have been dimming our light or suffocating our light in order to keep us in a controlled and sort of fear-based sort of way of living, even though you would never necessarily believe that that was happening. There was this undercurrent always of fear. What's next? What do I need to prepare for? Do I have free will? Do I have free choice? Can I speak my truth? Like, what's going on? There's always this underlying fear in the human collective. Designed. There's always been a control. We just didn't realize until now. And now we're stepping out of it, and it sounds like and looks like it's getting louder, and it's not. It's not. It's not. Whew. Okay. So there you have it. There was a lot in that video. And I will put the links to the 12th dimensional grid video and how we shifted from 5D to 3D in down below as well, if you want to do more or listen to how that worked. Some things are going to make sense. Some things are like, no way. Maybe all of this was no way. And again, like I said in the beginning of the video, you don't have to hold any of this. None of this has to be your truth. This can all be hogwash. But it's my truth. And it's the Galactic Federation of Light's truth. And there's millions of ways in which we get to see our reality. This is just one. But many of you have seen this play out. Many of you were here thousands of years ago building the pyramids, building Machu Picchu, building the structures down in South America, Central America, South, these centers or fields that were holding very high frequencies. Many of you were engaging and interacting with the higher dimensional beings physically on the earth plane. And many of you remember the fourth dimensional races and the battle that began to play out way back then. The civilizations that were destroyed by these fourth dimensional beings. And so here we are in this now moment. And it is our turn as higher dimensional beings in human form to put an end to it, to be done with that cycle, that 7,000 year cycle. It's coming to an end now because of you. So not only are you in the human body to experience this really powerful, very beautiful shift in consciousness, believe it or not, you're also in the human body to shift that reptilian consciousness and alchemize it into light and to be done with it, to wipe our hands of it and say, let's go. It's our turn and it's what we're doing. I hope this made sense in some way, shape, or form. If you have questions, leave them down below. I'll do my best to look at some of them. Maybe I'll do another video answering these questions. Be gentle with yourselves. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for being here now. And I love you. You are loved. You are held. You are honored. You are cheered on in every now moment, whether you see that, hear that, feel that, or know that. It is true. And remember, the light wins. It already has. I love you.